When it comes to love, you know it makes life worth living. But a truth that's been vocal since day one is love unites. And at Xfinity, we understand love knows no limits. It just clicks. Our largest LGBTQ plus film and TV collection is home to stories that connect. Just say pride into your Xfinity voice remote and tune into all the universal truths that reflect how you love all year long.
This episode is brought to you by Snapple. Want to know another Snapple fact? The first hot air balloon passengers were a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. Ridiculous. Check out Snapple.com to find ridiculously flavored Snapple near you.
I'm Julia Turner, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Does Inside Out 2 Get Anxiety Right edition. It's Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. On today's show, the Pixar sequel Inside Out 2 tackles anxiety and dominates at the box office. Brats, a Hulu documentary directed by Andrew McCarthy, the actor who was a member of the group of 80s actors called the Brat Pack, explores how the moniker affected the careers of Emilio Estevez, Rob Lowe, Demi Moore, and the rest of the gang, and the confounding evolution of Google search. Joining me today are Slate's film critic, Dana Stevens. Welcome back, Dana.
Hey, good to be back.
And critic Steve Metcalf. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Julia.
Even though we are all here today, I'm going to give hosting a whirl, and we'll be changing that up a bit in the coming months so Steve doesn't always have to carry the load. All right, shall we start?
Ready when you are.
Let's make a show.
Pixar's Inside Out 2, the sequel to the much-loved 2015 original, tackles a bevy of new emotions welling in its teen protagonist, Riley. Chief among them, anxiety. The film also arrived at an anxious moment for Pixar, which has produced a recent run of box office underperformers. But Inside Out 2 pulled a staggering $155 million opening weekend, the second biggest animated opening ever, and the biggest film in theaters since Barbie. Before we dive in, let's listen to a clip. We'll hear the gang of personified emotions in Riley's brain, led by Amy Poehler's Joy, meet newcomer Anxiety, played by Maya Hawke.
Orange? Who made the console orange?
Do I look orange?
I didn't touch it.
Orange is not my color.
Not me. Hello, everybody. Oh my gosh, I am just such a huge fan of yours. And now here I am meeting you face to face. Okay, how can I help? I can take notes, get coffee, manage your calendar, walk your dog, carry your things, watch you sleep.
Wow, you have a lot of energy. Maybe you could just stay in one place?
Anything. Just call my name and I'm here for you.
Okay, love that. And what was your name again?
Oh, I'm sorry. I can get ahead of myself. I'm Anxiety. I'm one of Riley's new emotions, and we are just super jazzed to be here. Where can I put my stuff?
What do you mean, we?
Anything. Just call my name and I'm here for you.
Okay, love that. And what was your name again?
Oh, I'm sorry. I can get ahead of myself. I'm Anxiety. I'm one of Riley's new emotions, and we are just super jazzed to be here. Where can I put my stuff?
What do you mean, we?
Just super jazzed to be here. Where can I put my stuff?
What do you mean, we?
And thus follow the additional litany of new teen emotions that we get to meet in this film. Dana, let's start with you. What'd you make of Inside Out 2? Does it achieve the heights of the original?
Oh, I don't know. That's a tough question because I think a sequel is always going to have a hard time. It's never going to have that gift of being the introduction of the concept. And this is so high concept in particular that maybe it's inevitable that it not be as great as the first. But I basically love this movie with no notes. Like, it's going to take a lot of conversation before I get to the tiny objections I had to this movie. It was so wonderful and so much better than I expected because, as you mentioned, Julia, Pixar is in a weird moment. There was a demoralizing announcement from Pixar's Pete Docter last week about their plans going forward to basically do fewer original movies from auteurs and rely more on sort of studio product and sequels. And so going in to see a Pixar sequel after kind of realizing that Pixar is getting more and more Disneyfied as a company had me on edge. But I think this movie delivers on every level and that it really takes the concept of, the personified emotions inside a young girl's head to a much more sophisticated place. It's missing a few characters and voices from the first film that leave a bit of a hole, but then there's some really exciting new inventions, not just Maya Hawke's anxiety that you just heard, but there's 3 other new emotions. My favorite of which, I hope we talk about her a bit, is ennui, the perfect teen emotion voiced by Adele Exarchopoulos with incredible sort of French droopy disdain. I laughed. I cried for probably the last 10 minutes of the movie straight. So I don't want to hear any cynical mean talk about Inside Out 2, but you're critics, so go ahead. I know people love to say Pixar's done, but I think that this is a very heartening piece of counter evidence.
I mean, I kind of feel like Dana's placed some like orange cones around my possible response, and I have to like do a nice little slalom where I'm the dick. But I remember liking the first one, not loving it. I would say that I liked this one slightly less than that. Sequelitis, it's fine. But I mean, one admires Pixar for their, kind of wonderful and wonder-filled chutzpah. I mean, I always love to think of the pitch meetings of like, let's make a cute fish movie. Everyone like nods in assent around the boardroom table. And in the first 30 seconds, the mom dies, and that's why Finding Nemo works. And similarly, like, what's the pitch for this movie? It's like a movie about the integrative and disintegrative struggles of the ego and childhood self-formulation. Like it's, it's like kind of crazy. It's a concept that immediately produces 2 parallel, but in some ways very separate movies. It's the inner life of Riley is a kind of chase movie, that in many ways is super traditional, like highly distinctive Muppet-like, creatures, animated creatures running around a super weird, somewhat threatening, somewhat playland-like, landscape towards or away from something at all moments while interacting with one another in cute, super highly distinctive ways. I totally agree, Dana. Ennui made me laugh every single time. And then the second parallel movie is the outer world, teen world, in this movie, pubescent world of a girl just about to enter high school, and the social dramas and all of the challenges of a huge threshold moment in your life. And what's funny is that in and of themselves, each one is a banal movie, and together they do something quite original, but not always ironically integrated, right? I mean, the whole drama, the overarching drama is how do you create an integrated, healthy ego? And it's, of course, out of all of these highly conflicting emotions, impulses. There's an interesting thing about kind of layers of selfhood that something forms, that the sort of first movie was about forming core belief structures. And this movie is more about the ways in which those are both built upon and utterly detonated in early adolescence. There's a wisdom and a kind of, I think, probably very informed. I feel like people have read some requisite literature on the formation of a child, a childhood and early adolescent self in trying to concretize these relationships. At the same time, kind of for me, a definitive point was made by the Vulture writer Alison Wilmore, which is like she was wondering who's in control here, right? It's not entirely clear who the agent of the movie is, and you've gotten into some really, really crazy metaphysics about free will and agency and what is the unconscious mind in control of us? Are we in control of the unconscious mind? But Julia, maybe that's the struggle that this film is about, and I missed the point. And very quickly, I was surrounded by kids. They loved the movie, but some of them were like 5 years old and didn't get it at all because they haven't started to go through puberty, and they're vocalizing that confusion, and the parents are sort of trying to talk them through it. And so the movie is playing out in real life around me like it's fucking Rocky Horror for 5-year-olds, which was awesome.
Yeah, the emotions are somewhat sophisticated, and there were some people wondering whether the typical Pixar audience who loved Finding Nemo would relate to ennui or anxiety. I saw the film with my 11-year-old twins in a packed theater on opening night, and like Dana, wept for the final 10 minutes of the film, to the delight of my sons, who watched me cry rather than watching the end of the film, and who enjoyed it. I really loved it and thought it was surprisingly successful because it becomes a pretty elaborate contraption. The original 5 emotions, the first movie was about the arrival of sadness in the child mind and what role sadness plays in our lives and psyche, right? And then sadness has become one of the gang, and we get anxiety, envy, ennui, and embarrassment as the new teen emotions, the puberty emotions that arrive. But really, it's anxiety's show. The other 3 are relegated to sidekickdom. I was curious, what you guys made of the centrality of anxiety in the movie. I mean, the thing that's so interesting and cool about these movies and about the fundamental philosophical, psychological questions they're tackling is that you watch a Pixar movie and you kind of come home and want to read about developmental psychology. But did the portrayal of anxiety square with your sense of the role that it plays in teen existence?
Yeah, or even adult existence. The idea that, anxiety essentially, this isn't giving away too much, I don't think, but, anxiety sort of takes over the controls, right? In a literalization of the metaphor of suppressing your emotions, the original 5 emotions get bottled up and sent to a different part of the brain. And so anxiety becomes this sort of, at once the antagonist of the movie, right? I mean, it's her that's sort of upending the order in the kid's brain. But she's a very sympathetic antagonist in the end, too, because she's trying to help. And that seemed like the perfect metaphor for anxiety to me, right? Anxiety is sort of like the desire to manage one's future gone berserk. And so I won't give away how that kind of gets managed in the end, but I don't know. They consulted with a lot of psychologists making this movie, and we read an interview with 3 of the psychologists who were sort of there in the background advising right down to the animation. What kind of a facial expression would you have when you're having a panic attack, et cetera. And I don't know. I thought that stuff was all beautifully handled. Like I said, you're going to have to dig deep to get me to offer any criticism of this movie. But I will offer the one moment, or kind of a recurring moment, that I thought the movie was a little bit pandering and that I did sense a Disneyfication or a DreamWorksification of the Pixar universe, which was these construction worker characters that come in to kind of demolish the brain so that it can be rebuilt, which is a funny metaphor and a funny idea. But the way they looked, they were clearly minions, right? I mean, they were like reverse minions who were blue and yellow instead of yellow with blue, and who were little beans that run around fixing things and making funny sounds. And I felt that right there was a moment where Pixar was stooping to pander a bit.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't catch that way. I don't know. What did you think, Steve?
I thought that they made, I'm not sure whether it was a strong or a weak choice to isolate the variables here and bear down on anxiety as anxiety by taking social media and the cell phone out of the plot very pointedly. They have to hand them over, the peer group in which he's going to experience this anxiety. They all have to hand their cell phones over at the beginning of the weekend. They're all together as a group. And then secondly, let's say the opposite sex is missing, which doesn't mean that romance and sexuality are missing at all. I do not want to imply that, but boys aren't there. And similarly, unless I missed it, there's no kind of romantic longing. There's, powerful same-sex aspirational longing. So it was much more about peers and older peers and wanting to fit in and making a large transition. In that sense, there was I don't know if it's exactly Disneyfication, but there's an enforced innocence that, Dana, to the extent that there is anything like a mental health epidemic or an anxiety epidemic among especially teenage girls, of which I, recently have had 2, now down to 1, but to the extent that that's a real social phenomenon that this movie is trying to in some way attack head on, it doesn't attack it head on. It actually evades what may be the single largest causal element. I mean, this movie coincides with the Surgeon General attempting to issue a warning on, effectively on all social media for its effects on mental health. I mean, is that not evasive?
Yeah, 2 things, Steve. I mean, first of all, I think it was a very strong choice not to have there be some sort of explicit romantic attraction in the movie. I was sort of dreading the moment that there was going to have to be like a boy that appeared and some sort of either competition over the boy or crush on the boy. it's all essentially girls interacting with each other and in a non-romantic way, although there is something that might be coded as a crush, but never explicitly in the movie. That seemed both age appropriate for the kids that will be watching it, right? Because I think this is aimed at slightly younger kids than the actual age of Riley, 13, in the movie. As for social media, yeah, I mean, that I guess was a way of getting straight to the friendship relationships, right? This movie takes place over 3 days at a hockey camp where these 3 girls who just graduated from middle school are competing in hockey games. And so taking the phones out of the mix both allows them to kind of relate directly, right? And keeps it from being a social commentary. Like, I don't think this movie wants to be a social satire. It's about the interior of one person's brain. And I was not bothered at all by the removal of phones from the mix. Like, the movie is not trying to be a broad snapshot of what it is to be a teenager at this moment. It's just the opposite. It's trying to burrow into the interior of one person's brain.
Well, and it's interesting because it's trying to deal with timeless questions. And the reason that anxiety feels like an urgent subject of inquiry right now has to do with the prevalence of cell phones among teens. But the movie is almost making an argument about the persistence of these questions about emotions and selfhood throughout. But I actually didn't catch on that in watching it. It is a conspicuous absence. The anxiety is all about acceptance and selfhood and achievement and how one relates to all of those ideas. And the complicating factor of the phone is implied rather than the subject of the film, which is an interesting choice. Can I ask you guys one last question, since you've been through parenting teens, which I have not yet? Ennui is definitely the funniest of the new characters, although embarrassment, played by Paul Walter Hauser, nearly wordlessly, but wonderfully. And we also get Envy, which is, the 47th role by Ayo Edebiri this year, and she doesn't get very much to do. But Ennui really steals the show among the new sidekicks. But is Ennui like I found myself struggling to, it didn't feel as clear what role Ennui played. And like, my assumption is that the kind of deadpan, low affect, I don't want to talk, I don't want to communicate vibe, that some teenagers give off is not actually a core emotion seeping through, but sort of a coping mechanism or I was confused that Ennui was presented as one of the fundamental internal drives rather than that set of behaviors being like the public face of other internal emotions. Do I have Ennui and teenagers wrong, or does the movie?
I guess I was thinking of it more in terms of the internal logic of the movie. I just love the role that character plays in that set of characters in the headquarters of the brain. I mean, there is some commentary, I think, being made about the uses of these apparently negative emotions, right? Like embarrassment. I won't give away how he does this, but the existence of embarrassment helps to reconcile all of the emotions at the end, right? So he serves a purpose in the way that embarrassment can serve a purpose, right? It can show you how to act better the next time so that you're not sort of exposed in whatever way you feel exposed. And Ennui does the same thing in the sense that she provides the chill that the very anxious Riley is often lacking, right? So one of my favorite moments is when you hear the internal dialogue of Riley as she's walking along with the older cool girls at hockey camp, with her brain madly racing of how she can fit in and what can she say, and she keeps making a fool of herself. And there's this moment that you hear the French chill voice of Adele Exarchopoulos as Ennui saying, "What do you think pockets are for?" She wonders what to do with her hands. So she puts her hands in her pockets and all is well.
No, it definitely works comedically. I got stuck on the emotional logic of it, but maybe that's just me being a stickler and I don't need to be. All right. Well, the film is Inside Out 2. It has brought Pixar roaring back to box office domination. Check it out. And if you don't, everybody else will.
If the functioning of the glands is not balanced, the adolescent may differ from others of the same age. Although these differences are likely to even out in the end, they may cause emotional disturbances.
Deciding what to pack for a trip can be stressful. I can speak to that being on a trip right now. The clothes you're bringing need to match the weather where you're going. You need to feel good in them. They need to be packable. Well, that's where Quince comes in. Quince has high-quality vacation essentials you'll be packing for many trips to come. They have items in summer fabrics like linen and silk. Silk is one of Quince's specialties. They even have premium luggage options for your travel, and they're all priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. That's because by partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes the savings on to you. You know, Quince couldn't ask for more organic advertising this week because I happen to be on a trip visiting family in California, and I happen to have packed a Quince item in my luggage, which is the black silk tiered maxi dress that I think I've mentioned before. That's my favorite latest Quince essential, and I've already worn it twice on the trip. It's great when you can find an item that travels well while looking good, and Quince has a lot of choices for exactly that. Pack your bags with high-quality essentials from Quince. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
Tired of not being able to get a hold of anyone when you have questions about your credit card? With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yes, you heard that right. You can talk to a human on the Discover customer service team anytime. So the next time you have a question about your credit card, call 1-800-DISCOVER to get the service you deserve. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Dana, what business do we have?
We have a couple items of business this week, and the first one is a really important and fun one, which has a couple more weeks of applicability, and that's that we are still in the window for sending in your submissions to the Summer Strut playlist. This is an annual show that we do at the end or somewhere in the middle of the summer, where we compile a gigantic playlist of pop songs that make you want to strut down the summery streets from all of our listeners. We then listen to that playlist and bring in Chris Molanphy, Slate's pop music critic and chartologist, to talk about all your various songs of the summer. So the submission deadline, if you want to send in some songs, is July 1st. We then will take about a month to listen to the songs and start compiling our sub lists and getting ready to share them with you. And the only guidelines, one that we put in this year, is you can submit 3 songs and no more, because otherwise we get whole album sides and the list gets out of control. 3 summer songs of your choice. Just send in the title and the artist, or if you can, a link to the song. And our wonderful production assistant, Kat Hong, will compile that into the mega playlist that we're all starting to listen to now. The place you send that is our regular email address, culturefest@slate.com. And one more note, if you can remember to put Summer Strut, put those words somewhere in the subject line of your email, then it'll be easier for Kat, our production assistant, to separate out those emails and put them on the list.
And I will say, although we already have so many good songs, artists keep dropping more albums, like more struttable albums keep landing. There's Charli XCX has some music. Normani finally dropped her album. Like, the music industry is producing new struts faster than we can keep up. We're like Lucy and the Chocolate Factory. So still some time to get the new bops into our ears if you're listening tens thither.
All right. So send them in, culturefest@slate.com. And our only other business announcement this week is the normal one, which is our call for Slate Plus membership. If you're a Slate Plus member, you know this already, but you are missing 1/4 of the Slate Culture Gabfest if you're not a member, because we do not just 3, but 4 segments every week of about equal length. The 4th one is our Slate Plus segment, which is behind the paywall. You only hear it at the end of the show if you are a Slate Plus member. And it's usually a slightly looser, sometimes goofier, sometimes more confessional segment. It's something that is on a slightly different note than the main 3 topics of the show. So if you're a fan and you want to hear that 4th segment, sign up at slate.com/culture plus. You'll also hear members only programming like that on other Slate shows like Slow Burn, the Political Gabfest, and others. And best of all, you will get unlimited access to all of the writing on slate.com and all the podcasting. You never hit a paywall when you're a Slate Plus member. These memberships matter a lot for us and our magazine and keeping it going. So please sign up today if you haven't at slate.com/culture plus. Once more, that's slate.com/culture plus. Okay, onward.
Brats, the new ABC News documentary available on Hulu, is actor and director Andrew McCarthy's personal, sometimes painful exploration of being in the Brat Pack, the group of actors who starred in popular teen films like The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire in the early 80s. and in particular, what happened when David Blum, a journalist for New York Magazine, characterized the group as fame-hungry and feckless and gave it its enduring name. In this clip, we'll hear McCarthy meeting with fellow Brat Pack member Emilio Estevez and discussing the impact of Blum's article.
I mean, the fallout, my recollection is it was immediate and big.
You and I didn't do a movie because of it.
This is what I thought. I thought we were
Young Man with Unlimited Capital, which
Yes.
is one of the best scripts I had read in a long time.
You were going to do it, and they wanted me to do it too, and then they told me that you didn't want me to do it. And I just assumed at the time, it hurt my feelings up, but I assumed it was simply the Brat Pack.
I didn't want to have anything to do with any of us. To be seen again in another film would ultimately and could potentially have a negative impact. Working together just almost felt like we were kryptonite to each other.
My understanding, you were not interested in talking about the Brat Pack for years and years.
I'm asked to do retrospectives all the time, whether it's Repo Man or The Outsiders or Young Guns or Breakfast Club. I turn everything down.
How come you're talking to me?
Because you called me. Because you asked. You called me. And I also thought it was time that we sort of clear the air on a couple of things.
Steve, as our resident expert on the 80s and as someone who I think is maybe generationally contemporaneous with this group, I'm dying to know what you made of this film, which is more personal and peculiar than you might expect it to be.
Yeah, Julia, that's exactly right. I think almost exactly Andrew McCarthy's age, certainly within a year or so, which means I saw these movies when they came out. They loomed very large on my horizon in one way or another, loved some, resented others. Also, later in life, when I very first moved to New York City in the 90s, now in my early 30s, used to see Andrew McCarthy walking around the West Village. And he looked so normal, like a vastly handsomer me, but not out of scale with the time and the place of the West Village at that moment, right? Like he didn't seem extra human. He didn't seem to be beamed in from another reality, like Hollywood or from the movies itself. He gave off very powerfully the aura of a man imprisoned in what he clearly perceived to be my recognition of him. There was a pathos to it. And what he imagined I was thinking was exactly what I was thinking. Brat Pack. And whatever fucking happened to Andrew McCarthy. And so this is a poignant film. I really perceive it as of a piece with the Supermodel documentary that we talked about. The recognition 40 years later that these were actually thinking, living, breathing, and are now inevitably, thanks to time, decaying human beings. The experience of them making the movie seems to be therapeutic for them. I think in a weird way, it's therapeutic for me, maybe. And the fact that we might need a reminder that these people were mortal is a consequence of, as you say, Julia, exactly that moment when they were made. There was celebrities always come with deification. I don't mean to be ahistorical, but I do think that there was a specific moment in the early 80s where there was a bizarrely synthetic and technicolor quality to the people whose fame derived from that 5-6 year period between roughly 82 and roughly 1987. Before I pass it off, I just want to say there's a piece of chronology that I wasn't aware of that I think is really key, Dana. I'm curious what you think about that to this whole story, which is that The Breakfast Club, which I think is the one unassailable masterpiece of the movies that are associated with the term Brat Pack, a really enduring, a really special film, arguably maybe the best like adolescent or American high school movie ever made, certainly one of them, came out right before the article came out. And so there was this sense of possibility and incipient glamour and all kinds of hope and youthfulness. And then the article just comes in and sort of, according to this film and McCarthy, comes in and just like, it's like Bambi versus Godzilla. The giant foot just comes right in and kills the little baby deer.
I mean, as a film critic, I only wish that one had so much power as a person writing a profile of some movie stars. I'm glad we're talking about this movie now because I guess we get to have a fight about it because I don't know if you guys felt what I felt, but I was startled by how much this movie felt like score settling from Andrew McCarthy. I just thought as a documentary about a group of people and a moment in time and all these things that, you know, are also kind of my generation. I'm a bit younger than Steve, but I more like was in high school when these movies came out. This documentary just felt to me like a set of symptoms that Andrew McCarthy in particular, not representative of the rest of the group that he was talking to, has been harboring for 30 plus years, all hanging on this 1985 New York Magazine piece that the documentary tries to make it sound like this is sort of like the AD BC moment in like 20th century history, before and after the David Blum article, which Andrew McCarthy is barely mentioned in. If you go back and read the article, the only mention of him as an actor in this, what was basically a profile of Emilio Estevez, that sort of turns into a snapshot of this group of privileged, famous kids in 80s Hollywood. Andrew McCarthy is mentioned once. He's mentioned anonymously by one of the other actors who says something not very nice about him, essentially sort of says he has no range and they don't think he has a future as an actor. I can see why that would have hurt McCarthy's feelings at the time and why he might still harbor some resentment toward whoever that was that anonymously told the author that. But it's not at all the case that article tears him down or even necessarily tears the Brat Pack down. It sort of coins that snarky phrase, but I kind of feel like a lot of what this documentary is about, without realizing that it's about it, is Andrew McCarthy's resentment that his career didn't go anywhere. And there are some big omissions in this documentary, like the fact that he went into rehab in 1992. He had a drinking problem, which he's been open about and wrote a memoir about recently. But the documentary doesn't mention that, or maybe vaguely gestures toward the fact that he was partying a lot. But, there could be plenty of reasons, from, his personal life to him just not being suited for movies later on, that his career didn't go the way he wanted it to. And I found this movie hard to watch because it had so much unacknowledged resentment in it.
That's so interesting, Dana, because it's indirect, and I don't think it's perfectly crafted, because it doesn't seem totally in control of that resentment, and there are some gaps. And we should also say he's been a working actor all this time, in addition to being a director and travel writer, but he's been logging regular roles on successful TV series for decades. So it's not as though he's in a ditch somewhere, but he does seem to make the subject of the film, how did this article make us all feel? What did we all go through? And I think the film is in some ways quite revealing about how this different group of people process this thing, which seems to have been more of a lodestone in Andrew McCarthy's mind than in most of these other stars. I don't know. I found it kind of fascinating to watch, even if I wasn't always sure that it was fascinating for the reasons that Andrew McCarthy meant it to be fascinating. One of the things that becomes the arc of the film is him chasing down all these past co-stars, and he meets with Ali Sheedy looking glowing and lovely on a nice sofa. He meets with his fellow Brat Packers of varying levels of subsequent success in, Hollywood homes of varying levels of opulence. John Cryer's, well-appointed, heavily syndicated kitchen, Rob Lowe's, glimmering, dappled Malibu retreat, to the home of Demi Moore, who turns out to be like the Yoda of the Brat Pack. She's so penetratingly emotionally acute, so kind. She speaks more clearly than Yoda does. But she manages to great warmth, great welcomingness, and great kindness basically say, you're the one who made this a big deal. Like, this doesn't have to have been a big deal. And the reason it was a big deal for you has to do with other things that were going on for you. And she, without getting specific, talks about her own processing, how she's had to observe how the things that have happened to her in her life affected her. I love it as a portrait of a bunch of people at age 60 who are thinking about what their lives amounted to. And it's interesting too, because the celebrities who seem the coolest with it are the ones in the biggest, fanciest homes, which makes you wonder, like, does the amount of success that you achieved make it easier to have this be a small thing in the rearview mirror? Or was your ability to take this for what it was, which was not much, allow you to go on and pursue the kind of success that, lands you in a dappled Malibu kitchen? I don't know. It ended up being a movie about bigger things and not entirely in control of its pitches, but still a pretty revealing document, I thought.
Exactly that. I mean, it's her wisdom and magnanimity is a direct consequence of having gone on to huge movie stardom in the 90s. She was the highest paid actress in Hollywood for a period of years, right around Ghost and beyond. But in addition to the Supermodels documentary, it reminded me of the documentary about this failed, at the time, Sondheim musical, The Total Bomb, Merrily We Roll Along, now triumphantly revived with Daniel Radcliffe and Jonathan Groff. Anyway, that documentary is called The Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened. It was made or co-made by a friend of mine. It's an unbelievably beautiful film. It's the totally thoughtful, self-reflective version of this, like how failure shapes a life, how the ex post facto rationalizations of the successful that look back on a determinative moment and see in it their own agency and eventual wisdom that conduces to their success, who stays stuck in the moment and why. And I agree with Julia wholeheartedly that this movie is not in control of that at all, but the not in controlness of it unwittingly becomes the subject of the film in some sense. I'm very curious, before we end this discussion, I really want to ask both of you, but maybe Julia especially, what did you make of what in some ways the money shot of the film, right? Which is after making clear that he feels like he's taken a lifetime wound from this designation, the Brat Pack, Andrew McCarthy goes and confronts, I guess is probably the right word, the journalist who wrote the original piece. And how did you take the journalist's response and that segment of the documentary?
Yeah, that confrontation has some catharsis to it for McCarthy, it seems. Blum seems unrepentant and also not that thoughtful about the piece he made. I mean, I think he helps. There's a moment at the end where he says he doesn't regret it and he would do it again. And then he says, in part, that he himself was 29 when he wrote it. And there's some footage of him on a talk show at the time, and they all just look so vulnerably young, including Blum. And he has a line about that youth is a time for making mistakes, which doesn't make it a mistake that he regrets. But he was like, I was just trying to get Tina Brown's attention. Like, I wanted to be a star of magazine writing, which, I don't believe he ever did go work at a magazine that Tina Brown edited. I think he's ended up as a journeyman journalist in a way that maybe is a little bit parallel to where McCarthy feels he has found himself. And there's a parallelism there that's kind of lovely. And in general, the film lets people push back on the idea that somehow this article was this, atom bomb of destructive cruelty. Malcolm Gladwell also shows up. There's sort of a comical moment in the film where we've mostly been talking to former Brat Packers, and then suddenly McCarthy gets in the car and is like, to figure this out, I had to go talk to Malcolm Gladwell. And you're like, really? But then, of course, Gladwell turns out to be a good interview and actually pretty penetrating on this moment. And essentially, again, the thing I admire about the film is McCarthy goes around looking for people to validate his narrative that this was a terrible article that ruined everything. And everyone's like, not really. Gladwell's like, well, it really was a seismic shift and Hollywood was changing. And the job of journalists is to put a name to things. And this was a particularly great and sticky name. Like, get over it. I will say that on a filmmaking perspective, though, the kind of every so often some weird retro filter shows up with a faux film thingamajiggy at the side, but with no consistent application. Like the sense that this documentary is a little bit messy and made by a person who's a little bit of a mess is definitely persistent throughout.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the question of form, because this is the opposite of me on Inside Out 2 this week. There's almost nothing I liked about this movie, and I so wanted to like it. Having grown up on these movies and having, literally had a dreamboat crush on Andrew McCarthy specifically in my teens, I really wanted to hear his perspective of that time. And yet I just found this movie so unintentionally exposing of the lack of perspective of the filmmaker. And that extends to the form of the movie. I was watching this with my brother and his wife, and all three of us separately noticed, to the point of we couldn't stop laughing whenever it happened, how poor the framing during the interviews was and how bizarre the choices of what to show during a one-on-one interview was. Because the body of the movie is Andrew McCarthy sits down with somebody, right? Malcolm Gladwell, Bret Easton Ellis, the various Brat Packers who are willing to meet with him, and has a conversation with them. A pretty simple thing to film, over the shoulder shot, see one person, see the other person, get a sense of the setting, done. But somehow, I guess Andrew McCarthy was trying to do more to prove he was a director or something. So did you guys notice how suddenly the framing would switch and we'd be looking at like a lamp in the foreground or a sort of like flower vase on the table? There were just these strange, arty perspectives constantly being taken in every interview segment. It was just so distractingly made. And yes, Julia, the retro filters, and it was just so busy in a way that made it feel cluttered and distancing when it was supposed to be confessional and intimate. I did not have high expectations for this as a work of art. I just wanted it to be an interesting delivery vehicle for Brat Pack info, but I felt that it failed in both departments.
All right. Well, the film is Brats on Hulu. Check it out. It's either intentionally revealing, unintentionally revealing, maddeningly distracting, but you can check in on the Brat Pack and develop new respect for Demi Moore's wisdom in Brats.
Their burgeoning popularity quickly earned them a nickname, the Brat Pack. Well, today, some, like Demi Moore, are still stars, while fame and fortune have not shone so brightly on others.
This episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. There's now a game-changing product to use before a night out with drinks. It's called ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. You have to make a choice. You can either have a great night or a great next day. ZBiotics is a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/culture to get 15% off your first order when you use culture at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/culture and use the code CULTURE at checkout for 15% off.
When it comes to love, you know it makes life worth living. But a truth that's been vocal since day one is love unites. And at Xfinity, we understand love knows no limits. It just clicks. Our largest LGBTQ+ film and TV collection is home to stories that connect. Just say pride into your Xfinity voice remote and tune into all the universal truths that reflect how you love all year long.
In The New Yorker, Kyle Chayka asks, is Google S.E.O. gaslighting the internet? The article, which explores how changes in Google's algorithm are making life difficult for small, independent sites and giving more love to mainstream sites with big name recognition, arrives at a broader moment of transformation for Google, which has also recently begun offering AI-generated answers to search queries, sometimes with comically incorrect results, and sometimes with pretty useful results that keep you from clicking through to the underlying articles or information that you're using. We thought we'd zoom out and take a broader cultural look at search in response to Chayka's article, looking at both how it's changed us and how it is changing at this moment. Dana, I'm curious first what you made of Chayka's article and kind of the narrower point he's making about what types of sites get recommended to you when you use search these days.
Yeah, this article and this development is about a lot of different things at once, which I think have come to a head in Google's recent announcement that they're going to put AI results at the top of searches, right? To sort of try to capture attention on Google and answer your question without making you do your own research. That's the new development, but it's sort of the top of the crest of a wave of stories about Google that have been about the degradation of Google as a tool and of search engines in general as a way to orient yourself within the world of the internet. Like a lot of the discussions we've had about AI in the past few months, or maybe the past year since ChatGPT, et cetera, started to roll out, this story is very disheartening in terms of the vast chasm between the amount of harm that this new technology or new use of technology could cause and the amount of alarm that the company making the change seems to feel about it. I mean, Google in this tech conference event where this new use of AI at the top of each Google page search was announced seemed to be very sanguine about the idea that, hey, people come to Google to find an answer to a question. So we're just going to make it quicker to find that answer, completely overlooking the vast economy and in particular, the online media economy that's held up by the way Google search has worked in the past, which, is essentially, yes, with some ads at the top, with more and more ads at the top as sponsorship and affiliate links become more important to Google, but that essentially when you enter a question into Google, what you have wanted all the years of Google's existence, the 20 plus years it's existed, are ways to go down your own paths and not a machine that tells you the answer. And I worry about the future of media literacy in a world where you have to do a bunch of extra clicking and extra scrolling to get to the part where you figure something out for yourself. I don't know if that alarms the two of you. I can't say that my Google experience is super different than it used to be. I don't even think I have this new tool appearing on my page yet, but it makes me worried, not necessarily for my own ability to find the best new toaster or something like that. I can still trust my own research to find a good toaster. I'm more worried about, all of the toaster companies and magazines that write about toasters. And I'm using toasters, obviously, as a silly example. But, our own jobs are held up by the way that Google and other search engines find our articles and our podcasts. So to me, this feels like a worrying future. And I want to know if the two of you share my anxiety.
Steve, I'm curious for your answer to that question and also for whether Google search has changed for you in recent months.
Well, a couple things. One is I had a good friend who back in the 90s wrote for The Stranger, the great alt weekly in Seattle covering tech. He had a weekly column. Google was one of his beats. And he said, don't be fooled, these guys. Don't be evil. They're evil already. He said they're gaming their search results. This was, Google's, I guess, 98 or something. So maybe it was the early aughts. But that was a surprise to me. I still thought, this is a window onto the world. It's relatively neutral, the way they stack these searches. And he was like, nah. So in some sense, plus ça change, right? Like it's these were always businesses. They were started as businesses. They were started in order to gain outsized market share, gain pricing power, sell our lives to third parties. We were the product. Like all of that has been true for a long time. Nonetheless, I would say a couple of things have changed. One is that the algorithm is designed, essentially what it's done is it's taken me as a data point and aggregated and studied me, not just the world. And then it matches me to what it thinks I want. And so, a line that I'm convinced I came up with, but probably didn't, is the internet is a mirror that purports to be a window. There's an intensification of that trend with the advances in AI and algorithmic computing powers of these large companies. They're just absolutely brilliant at anticipating what we believe reality to be based on our wish for what it would be, and then reflecting that back to us, therefore, deepening our personality disorders under the guise of making us feel like we're participating in something objective. The second trend is that, the internet, when you look at it as a sort of business, a large scale industry, basically, much less as a phenomenon, is, it's undergone a series of changes, one of which is that it arose at a moment when there was obviously the computing power and the networking power was allowing it to exist and have a retail phase. But the second thing was there was just an enormous amount of very, very cheap credit flowing around the world, really, not just the American economy, but much of it flowed into the American economy. And what that meant is that a non-profitable, in some ways, in some instances, radically non-profitable business, like, for example, Amazon, could for 40 straight quarters not have a profit, operate in the red, and Wall Street would effectively subsidize it because Wall Street itself was being subsidized by exceedingly cheap money. And the goal was always the same. The goal was exactly where they've arrived at, to create these category-killing, oligopolistic, potentially monopolistic businesses that control so much of not just an industry, but what we take to be reality, that they would have pricing power in some traditionally economic sense, that they would eventually fully monetize and become massively profitable, which happened a while ago. But then they'd continue using their, sort of 800-pound gorilla status to monetize. We're in the hyper monetization phase of the internet. And the internet, as a consequence, as an actual user experience, is vastly shittier. And it's the coming together of these two trends that, even though I do believe in the plus ça change story, this was always a capitalistic enterprise and it always was coming for us. I do think we're now having these two trends come together. That we think it's a window, but it's actually a mirror. The mirror is getting more sharply tuned to our own narcissism and this hyper monetization. These are really nasty trends, and I was grateful that Chayka is doing something to just remind people that this immediate experience of shittiness in the internet points to something much larger.
Part of what I enjoyed about his article is that it highlights that the problem with Google is not just AI. Like right now, there's so much attention on and fear about AI, and these AI summaries, which I am seeing in my experience of Google, are good user experience. I mean, sometimes you just quickly want the answer to something. Every time I make buttermilk, I have to look up what the ratio is of the acid to the milk, and if it just comes up, that's good. It's easier than clicking through 20 sites. Of course, it's not easier or better for the businesses of the people who put the buttermilk recipes on the internet if they don't get traffic anymore. And Google says they still will get traffic, and their tests show blah, blah, blah. People click through to links from the AI summaries. We'll see what the effect of this will be. But the likely effect seems obvious, which is that instead of going to a website to learn the answer to something, you'll just get it from Google's AI summary itself. But I will say that there's just so much more happening than AI. For me, living in California, Google has been so incredibly degraded recently because of Google's response to the efforts by journalists to get Google to pay publishers. There was a kind of national legislation proposed along the lines of what we've seen in Australia and Canada, but there's also California legislation in the offing that would require tech companies to remunerate the journalistic outlets that they benefit, whose work they benefit from by linking to. And as part of the, legislative fight around that, Google has stopped sending links to California-based publishers. So Google has been essentially useless for me for, a couple months, to the degree where I've tried to use Bing. Unfortunately, guys, using Bing is not a solution to Google's problems. It's just a worse search engine with similar problems. And the thing that it's left me thinking about is just what a rare moment we have lived in. The what Google did try to do, the accessibility of information that it provided, the service, the don't be evil service that it promised us at the beginning. And yes, you were right to be skeptical of that promise, Steve. And I think even for all of us who were on some level skeptical of the actual motives there, the utility was too great, even greater than the utility of Amazon shipping you diapers in the middle of the night, to ignore. And I just feel bereft at the loss, at sort of the notion that Google's just going to become this hermetic little closed loop of sending you AI summaries of information, and the information will get worse and worse and worse because nobody whose job it is to make and put information on the internet will be economically viable anymore. And we are already seeing in our political economy what happens when people's information sources become untrustworthy and degraded. And it seems really dark, and dark not just because of the AI of it all, but because of, the broader resistance to recognizing the role that Google plays in the ecosystem. And what Google is pretending to be is a librarian, right? That's sort of the kindly lady who helps us find everything that we need information wise. Like that's the ostensible role of Google. And it does not seem to accept that charge anymore as fundamental to its mission.
Well, also it's like you went and asked the librarian, for a book, and she's like eventually going to tell you, but first she's going to try to sell you 9 or 11 other books. It's like sponsored. Like the amount of scrolling I now have to do to get to the first non-sponsored result from Google, which is itself usually untrustworthy. I mean, it certainly had that function. The utility was massive, and I feel bereft too. I mean, I totally agree with what you've said, but it's just appalling what they've turned their own product into, and it's because they can get away with it because Bing sucks. There's no competitor.
Do you guys know the expression eating your seed corn? The idea of sort of short-term practices that don't make sense because they harm your long-term sustainability. That's exactly what Google seems to be doing right now. And the internet as a whole, is sort of eating its seed corn, like focusing on profit and, being able to sell products and having advertisers want to use them to the detriment of being a public utility. And the fact that there is no regulation anywhere on the internet to sort of maintain that public utility status that perhaps somewhat deceptively, but that Google for, 25 years, for a generation, really did have for most of the population. It was the yellow pages and the white pages, right? The thing that sort of you get in order to find your way through the world. That's just, it seems like it's not only really, really bad for users, but it's got to be bad for the company too in the end.
Well, we will have occasion to revisit this topic as search continues to degrade and possibly everything else too. So on that bleak note, let's refer you back to Kyle Chayka's article, Is Google S.E.O. Gaslighting the Internet? And send us your thoughts on how you're searching these days at culturefest@slate.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Let's endorse, guys. Steve, you never get to go first. You go first.
Look at me. Oh, can you say my name in a funny way?
Oh no, I haven't cultivated that. No, I can't. Esteban.
There we go. All right, we'll go with that this week. So last week, I wanted to play a game, and no one wanted to play along except Dan Coyce, who ruined it with the opening bid. I said, "Okay, listen to this Emmylou Harris song called "The Ballad of the Runaway Horse," and tell me who you think wrote it." So neither of you even listened to this song. So now I know.
I did listen to it. It's a beautiful song. It's quite long. I had no idea who wrote it, and I didn't send you an email to that effect, but that's what happened.
Can just throw out a name.
Dolly Parton.
There you go. Wrong. It was Leonard Cohen. And I mean, first of all, like, holy shit, slap your forehead. Like, give me some satisfaction, right? You can't believe that song was written by Leonard Cohen. I mean, the lyrics, if you bear down on them, have some Cohen-esque echoes, but it's like an incredible country song that were Dolly Parton to cover it, you wouldn't think, oh, that's that's a novelty gesture, right? Like she's covering a Nine Inch Nails song or something. How cute. It's just, he loved country music, by the way. But he never really wrote in that idiom, except to the best of my knowledge, that song is utterly in the idiom. And Emmylou Harris's version is amazing. There's a little bit of, like, speaking of Google, like possible confusion, search engine confusion here, because he recorded it under the title "The Ballad of the Absent Mayor." And she degendered it or sort of regendered it effectively with the singer as a woman. But it's an insanely beautiful melody. And I just think, I don't know, Julia, I defer to you. I mean, it just seems to me to work as a country song. Like, there's no sense that you need to know who wrote it or that you need to pay attention to how deeply equivocal and in some ways gut-wrenching those lyrics are, it just is a beautiful country song.
Yeah, well, it almost has the quality of being one of those like, folk songs with no author.
Yeah,
like it has sort of that timelessness of an ancient song or an authorless song in a beautiful way.
Beautiful, yeah. The track, and we'll link to it, of course, is the Emmylou Harris version is called The Ballad of the Runaway Horse. If you want to compare, there's The Ballad of the Absent Mayor that Cohen performed, and also there's a version by Teddy Thompson under that title that's mind-blowingly good. Super quickly, it's not really an endorsement because there are only a couple months left to see it. I did see Stereophonic, which won Best Play at the Tonys. I saw it last week. I really thought it was a mind-blowing experience. Is it a perfect play? Is it Hamilton in the sense that, not that Hamilton's perfect, but that it's like some incredible advance on the form? It's not really either one of those. I didn't care. I thought it was amazing. For those who don't know, it's a highly fictionalized sort of account of a Fleetwood Mac-like band making what will turn out to be the album that turns them from stars into superstars. But it's very much about the internal family romance of a band. And as someone who is obsessed with making records and how they were made at exactly the moment that Fleetwood Mac was doing all of this, it was catnip. I thought it was, if you can see this, if you are passing through New York, you're going to have to shell out to do it. It is really worth it. It's an incredible night at the theater.
All right, I'm going to go full me and recommend another show business documentary. I was just scrolling through past archives of endorsements to see how lately, I've endorsed show business documentaries of one kind or another. And I kind of have been on a roll of them, but it's such an irresistible form. And I'm on a trip right now. And so I always end up endorsing movies that I watch on planes because watching a movie on a plane is just strangely memorable and preserves that movie in amber. So I watched this excellent showbiz documentary on my last plane flight. It was about Mary Tyler Moore. And I think we talked about doing this on the show as a topic when it came out last year, Being Mary Tyler Moore. It was an HBO, not a series, thank God, not an overly padded 3-hour thing in different installments, but just a movie-length documentary about the life and career of Mary Tyler Moore. And it's so, so good. It's everything you want a showbiz doc to be that Andrew McCarthy's Brats was not, where you really get a sense of, Mary Tyler Moore's childhood and her background and her early career as a dancer and her time with Dick Van Dyke on that sitcom. Then, of course, a big central section on the Mary Tyler Moore Show itself, which, if you're a fan of that show, teaches you a ton about the making of it and is also just super nostalgic and wonderful to revisit some scenes from it. And, stuff about her personal life and about her period in rehab, and shows some of the dark side of her character as well, her difficulties with, her son. It's not at all a puff piece, but you really, really do get a sense of who she was, and you come out loving her even more than ever. So it's an HBO doc. You can find it there. I think it's also on Amazon Prime. It's around, Being Mary Tyler Moore.
I loved that show and love Mary Tyler Moore. Did you guys know that Sam Anderson, esteemed pal of the show, Sam Anderson, has a new podcast?
No. Tell us about it.
No.
Okay, so he is doing this new podcast for the New York Times called Animal. And there have thus far, I think, been 2 episodes. Maybe there was a third this weekend I'm not caught up on yet. He's basically just exploring the animal world and writing these sort of beautifully humanistic reported essays about, I guess I don't know why I said humanistic when it's about animals, but they are. It's sort of about using the experience of encountering animals and people who study rescue and research animals, what you learn from those encounters about animals and also what you learn from those encounters about the human animal is part of what makes the series so wise and good. But God damn, it is good. I mean, Sam Anderson is good in every format, but this podcast is such a great listen. There was a recent episode about puffins, but also kind of about sending your kids off to college. There was an incredible story about a heroic dog and a hamster in peril. I mean, I don't need to say more about this. Sam Anderson, new podcast, Animals. Go listen. It's a New York Times pod, and it is well worth your time.
Oh my God. Already scribbled down and Googled. Totally going to listen to that.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve Metcalf, for letting me take a turn in the chair.
You acquitted yourself beautifully. In fact, you made me in my previous 15 years look bad.
Oh, come on. That's bullshit.
No, I'm kidding. You were great.
Steve's anxiety is at the controls right now.
Dana, thank you for joining from the early bird time zone.
It was a pleasure.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page, slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Patel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong, and our producer is Jared Downing. For Dana Stevens and Stephen Metcalf, I'm Julia Turner. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Start your summer road trip at Midas and get up to $30 off your next repair service. Plus, get a free closer look vehicle check to make sure you're road trip ready. If you need brake service, an alignment check, or tune-up, hit up Midas for up to $30 off. For more details, request your appointment at Midas.com.